Hi, I'm John Sauve, and this is Art and Design. Today, my guest is Gil Ashby. Gil, thanks for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, John.
Gil, so I love your whole story, and I was hoping you could share with us. You grew up in Harlem.
I grew up in Harlem. I grew up in the 60s, and I had a brilliant time because when you grow up in the city like that, that's all you know. And so the community, your neighbors, the crowded streets, the activity that's pretty much nonstop just stimulates you, and it forces you to become like maybe self-aware, right? You start to engage with people and experience competition as soon as you walk out the door, because it's playing, right? And the play is shaping something in you that'll stick with you, you know, for your entire life. And it'll be a factor in, I think, how much you can push yourself. My folks were from the South, you know, like many, like all of my neighbors. I'm sure that there were some that were born in New York, and they moved to New York looking for a better way. And I don't know if they found a better way, but they found a way to live. And they brought us into the world. And it was a time of a lot of idealism because it was the 60s. It was the start of, well, in my awareness, it was the midst of the civil rights movements. So being a young boy, far too young to be engaged, but aware of what was going on, it had a tremendous impact. So, like, aside from all of the civil unrest, there were pretty amazing ideals that came, and they were about what came out of that time, and they were about identity. It was in the music, you know, it was a political slogan. We transitioned from being Negroes to being black to being African American, you know, and all of that starts to shape your psyche. All of that, for me, led to a yearning for education, because people died for that privilege. And I understood that it had a powerful value. And I was very idealistic. I still am as a person. It's one of the reasons that I teach, because there's a piece that's ingrained to be not so much activist, but active in the community and sharing, you know, the stories and encouraging young people the way I was, by brilliant women and men, you know, to keep moving forward and to keep believing that you weren't a statistic and that everything was possible, you know, and but it was also fun, man. As soon as you came outside on a sunny summer morning, you know, it was your block, it was your friends. The baseball game started, the races around the block, the competitions, they could be the silliest thing, you know, whose shoes were the cleanest, sneakers, who had the best jokes about people's families. And it you know, it really made us, I go back to that whole competitive thing. We were also, well, and it wasn't until later, right, when my family left Harlem and moved to the Bronx. I started high school. I was at I guess it was a vocational high school, but it was a high school of art and design. It was down on 57th Street and 2nd Avenue in Manhattan. So that took us off the block. But being a New Yorker and a commuter and having to get to Midtown every day, we read the newspapers. Reading was a big thing, right? Because it preceded all of this media, right? And also living in New York, riding the subway, right? So a lot of reading, and that bred a lot of opinions, right? So people were informed, whether it was more sports and social, too young to really understand and get into politics, but being an avid reader, really, started to expand how I saw the world, made me think more internationally than locally, right? By the time I was a freshman in college, well, I actually left New York City for my first few years in undergrad. I went to State University and studied fine art. But that was a temporary stop because I knew I wanted to get more focused training in the applied areas, which is illustration, because I wanted to make narrative pictures. I wanted to learn how to paint like the old masters, and there was no cultural barriers or intellectual barriers at that time. You start to learn about them, but as through the education process, but as you started to accept that this was necessary, this education, right, this enculturation was necessary for your development, right? At least this is from my personal space. I embraced it and accepted it. And so Western art ideals, structure, right, became, I won't say an obsession, but it became the focus of my education, because I understood that being a part of this culture, how critical it was for me to understand the origins. So that education, that the history, right, set all kinds of foundations for the power of ideas. It was the importance of the evolution of picture making, the parallels with that process in the cultures that they evolved from, the way that these methods and theories and processes became the foundation for not only making pictures, but I guess making the picture in my thought process, right? So everything is correlated. And, I evolved from that place, from the ideals to be fundamentally sound with my craft. And now that craft and the passion from drawing, which started as a kid, that was identified or qualified or quantified for me by my third grade teacher, became my central focus. So it's the basis of the way my art's evolved. So it's my consciousness, it's my education, it's my spirit, it's the culture, the cultures that I exist in that make me this person. And my intention with my art has evolved to a place where maybe like I the place that I was as a young person to being bigger than the moment, right? Because the power of art is its ability to transcend a moment, to preserve a moment, to be cliche and open up a dialogue, right? And then doing all of this stuff, never thought about the economic aspect of it. So it remained a pure pursuit, and it still is. You know, of course, now I see the world, and you have to live in the world, but it's still about those ideals, and that's not going away. And the beauty of it is that it's a light that's present and that's far away that allows you, or allows for me, always, no matter how dark or bright it is, to be able to see something and pursue it. So, potential at this stage in my life is still,
There's potential constantly. Yeah.
It's still possible.
Well, I have to put a commercial break in because
Cool.
you grew up in Harlem.
Right.
You had a third grade teacher that influenced you, encouraged you, and said you should really pursue your passion for art.
Right.
You end up in the high school in Midtown, which you had to apply to get into, right?
Right.
So therefore, between third grade and high school, you had a propensity towards art that you had to pursue.
Right.
You had to apply, and you had to become accepted into the School of Visual Art, right?
Right.
This is
Well, my high school was also, they called them specialized high schools. And I refer to it as a vocation because it was training a specific skill. But it was the best artists in the 5 boroughs. And some kids snuck in from Queens and Long Island. They had connections, you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. But so it was an environment of creative people, right? And from the neighborhoods. And all of us, were affected with this creative spirit. And so it was easy. Now, how we advanced beyond that was relative. But that was my grounding and my intention, because I wanted to be a part of the conversation and the history, was compelled. Because of that, I was compelled to keep pursuing. So from high school to college, because I was determined to get education. I was determined to be the first person in my family, and it might seem cliche, right? But the first male in my family to get out of high school on time. It was a few other cousins did it, but it was to get a bachelor's degree and then to get a graduate degree, right? And it was just to arm myself with thought, with the power of education. And very naive, very idealistic, but no. But in the end, it prepares me. At the School of Visual Arts, when I transferred there, my mentor, who just passed, the great Marshall Arisman, was a student of Richard Linder. So he was a part of the whole figuration movement. And as the leader of the undergraduate, because it wasn't a grad program at that time, illustration program, his influence as a figurative artist was informed by Linder and the people who didn't abandon, right? So this is like a really important space for me, right? Because what it did was take the training of illustration and which is the applied, right, discipline for picture making. But personalize it, because there's a big conversation about illustrators not creating their own content. And okay, so what, right? You know, there are the writers in history who didn't think that images ever should exist next to words. Okay, but that was a small but powerful group of writers and voices. So in New York, that individual aesthetic sensibility was critical, because the way my culture, well, my education evolved was that my narrative, my personal story was the most important and most powerful thing that I had. And I'm not competing with anybody. I'm trying to be the best me, because when a client approached me, they were buying my ability to articulate or express my thoughts that they felt were appropriate to meet their need to support whatever narrative, whether it was a cover or spot illustration. And back in those days, editorial art drove your market, right? So because of the level of exposure. And so if you got a spot illustration in the book review or the Washington Post or any of the Los Angeles Times or New York Times, your work was seen internationally. So that was the power of proliferation of publication, right? So the work wasn't necessarily initially meeting the audience in a gallery space, but it was serving the same purpose. It's just that it did that in conjunction with an article, a poem, a headline, a book cover is point of purchase. So what? You know, what's the difference between that and the encounter of a powerful image in a gallery?
More
right?
people see it.
More people see it, okay? And so that has been a driving factor in my art. I make my art is personal, and it's about my evolution as a creative person. And it has driven me to interesting places. How I ended up in Detroit. So back in the early 90s, my alma mater, School of Visual Arts, after getting my master's degree and starting to teach there as an adjunct in the 90s, I was invited to go and teach at the campus that the School of Visual Arts had in Savannah, which was closing because another school had sued them for basically encroachment, you know. And so I ended up in Savannah and teaching full-time. And the dean at that time, who hired me, literally left the day that I got down there to come to Detroit. So, as fate would have it, I would meet the woman who would become my wife, who's a Detroiter. And on a visit, I went to visit I had a visit with my, I don't know, I guess I could call him a friend. I don't know if that's politically correct. I had a great opportunity to talk to someone who knew me, who was in a position, right, who thought that I might be of service. So I ended up proposing, you know, the prospect of becoming a member of the faculty, and I received an invitation to interviewed for the chair's position because they were getting ready to start an independent illustration program. And so I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity. And I like to believe it was because I had a clear vision. I understood process. I was from a big market. But I think it was as much about it because the illustration was in transition, because illustration was being challenged by the design world. Because again, in my understanding of why, or one of the reasons that illustration was not accepted was we weren't controlling our own content, right? And we hadn't yet embraced technology. So my mission was to make sure that artists knew who they were, not that they didn't, but to encourage that and foster an environment or develop an environment that fostered that, right? I wanted our students, no matter where they were in the skill factor or the skill spectrum arc, to understand that the most powerful thing was not necessarily like the formal, right, but the power of the image, the power of the narrative, and so because there's a certain point when you're looking at an image that the aesthetic is transcended by the idea. And that's at the core of where I am philosophically as a teacher, but also, right, as a practicing artist. And so the intention was to help young people understand the power of their voice, their uniqueness, wherever they came from, because nobody could tell their story. And people love stories. And you can bend stories and get them to interesting places. So if you're a good storyteller and it's coming through in your images, I guess you can call it art. I guess you could call it visual communication. You could call it a lot of things. You might even say you like it, right? You might not like it. It might provoke a conversation. But that's the power of the image. So we evolved to this place where our students will well adapt to play the divine game of Pictionary.
I got to put another commercial break in. You went from School of Visual Arts in Manhattan
Right.
to Savannah School of Art,
Right.
to College for Creative Studies.
Not Savannah School of Art. School of Visual Arts, Savannah.
Savannah,
Because I don't want it to get mixed up with
the other one.
the other school.
Still,
Right.
great school, great education. Came back to CCS, which is College for Creative Studies, as the first chair of the newly formed illustration department, right?
Right.
So not only first chair, first black chair.
Right.
Big
Indeed.
deal.
Big deal.
Yeah.
And it wasn't lost at all. And my dean, Roger Williams, the president, Rick Rogers, my mentor in terms of exposure and establishing the administrative, Doug Kaiser, right, who was the head of the graphic design program at that time. And so the encouragement that I got from the administration and the support made it made that daunting opportunity possible. The faculty that were around me that decided to stay, and that was most of them. The adjuncts that I had the pleasure to hire right? My students who absolutely trusted me, as far as I knew. The students that are now teaching and are big in the art scene is, for me, an indication that maybe I said something right. Maybe we did something right.
Absolutely.
You know, and I'm humble because it's not just me, it was a team. But we took care of business. And whenever you give somebody, I think, who's really committed and prepared an opportunity that demonstrate what they're capable of, you could get a good result.
Well, and I think you're a prime example of paying it forward too.
Indeed.
So, Gil, I got to tell you, I don't think I've ever had an interview where I asked 3 questions. That was fantastic. I appreciate you coming on the Art and Design Show.
You
are
egged me, man.
amazing.
You pushed me on.
No, you are the best. This is exactly what we talked about.
Right.
And thank you so much for coming on. I love the story.
I'm sorry we run out of time, but it was a pleasure and an honor. And it's nice to get to know you. And
Oh, you're not done with me.
okay, I was going to say maybe another time.
Oh, we will. We will, definitely. Thanks, man.
Thank you.